Hi everyone, it's Shannon from the Loophole Fox, and today I'll be showing you how to work the even moss stitch. The even moss stitch is a really beautiful textured stitch that's pretty easy to create. It's nice and light, but a dense structure, so it stays nice and warm. The texture is on both sides with these nice wavy lines, and it's great for basically any project: scarves, washcloths, blankets, anything you can think of. All you need to know to create this stitch is how to chain, slip stitch, and half double crochet. I'll teach you how to do everything else. Let's get started. To practice the even moss stitch, you'll of course need yarn and a hook. Here I have a bulky 6-weight yarn. It is Bernat Softy Chunky. It is nice and bulky, so the stitches will show up. I'm also using my 7mm Furls Streamline Wood in Teak. You can of course use any yarn weight you like with any corresponding hook. I'll have links to everything I've used in the description below if you are interested, and also a link to the blog post which has a photo tutorial if you'd like to look at that as well. To get started working the even moss stitch, we need to chain an even amount. The even moss stitch requires an odd number of stitches, so of course with a turning chain, we need to chain an even amount. For the purposes of showing you how to work the even moss stitch, I'm going to go ahead and chain 12. You don't have to worry about any kind of stitch pattern or number of chains for the stitch pattern. As long as you end up with an odd amount of stitches, you'll be fine. So as long as you chain an even amount of chains, you'll have an odd number of stitches. So here I have my 12 stitches, and of course we're going to lose that first stitch because it is our turning stitch, so we'll have an odd number of stitches. Working into the second chain from the hook, we're going to go ahead and place a slip stitch. Keep this slip stitch fairly loose so that it's not difficult to work into on the next row. In the next stitch, we're going to go ahead and place a half double crochet. And you can see that half double crochet is quite a bit taller than the slip stitch, so don't worry about that. That actually helps create the texture on the pattern. In the next stitch, we'll place a slip stitch, and in the following, a half double crochet. Across this row, we're going to alternate placing a slip stitch, and then a half double crochet, a slip stitch, and then a half double crochet. These slip stitches do squish the half double crochet down a little bit, which helps create that beautiful wavy texture, which you'll see when I turn this row and we look at the other side. So I'm just coming up to the end here. I'm putting my last half double crochet in, and the last stitch of your row should always be a slip stitch. So here's the end of the row. You can see it looks a bit wonky on the top, but that's okay. That's the slip stitches pulling the half double crochets down a bit. It's meant to look like that. You can see where it's squishing them. You should always start and end your rows with a slip stitch. So let's move on to row 2. For row 2, we're going to chain 1 and turn. And here you can see the texture starting already. So here's the top. You can see the top of the half double crochets, and the third loop of the half double crochet is hanging out right here. That's what creates the wavy texture across your rows. And these slip stitches pulling the half double crochets down make that third loop really pronounced. So you can see the wavy texture in my swatch here. Okay, so we've chained 1 and we've turned. And what we want to do is put a slip stitch in the very first stitch. So we'll place a slip stitch here. And I want to point out, some people might count that chain as the slip stitch. I don't, because that chain helps build the height and make sure that your edges stay straight instead of kind of bowing a bit. So make sure to chain 1 and then slip stitch into the slip stitch. Next, we're going to find the half double crochet, which is this next stitch here. And we're going to put another half double crochet into the top of that stitch. Make sure that you don't pick up that third loop because we need that third loop to hang out to make the texture. And just like before, we're going to alternate putting a slip stitch in and then a half double crochet, making sure we don't pick up the third loop and do it in the top only. You will always be placing a slip stitch into a slip stitch and a half double crochet into a half double crochet. So it's a really easy stitch pattern to remember because once you have the first row done, you have your template basically to follow all the way across. You're putting a slip stitch into a slip stitch and a half double crochet into the half double crochet, making sure not to pick up that third loop. Okay, we're coming to the end of the second row here. I've just put my last half double crochet in. Don't forget that last stitch there. You do need to put a slip stitch in. And remember how I said to keep that nice and loose? That first slip stitch off of the chains can be really tight to work into. So try and stay a little bit more loose on that first one. This is what your work should look like so far. You can see that texture starting to work itself out here now. And of course, you know, the top is a little bit wonky, but we're going to go ahead and chain one. And we're going to turn. And now you can see the texture beginning on this side. So the texture moves up one row each time you turn. Same as before, we're going to work exactly the same. Chain one, turn, put a slip stitch into the slip stitch, making sure we're working only into the top and not picking up that third loop. We're going to put a half double crochet into the next stitch, slip stitch into the slip stitch, and half double crochet into the next. So you can see once you have that first row done, how easy it is to follow along with this stitch pattern. And it really becomes almost second nature to work along this because you know you're always putting one type of stitch into the same type of stitch. So you don't have to worry about alternating, you know, a slip stitch into a half double crochet or anything like that. You're always putting a slip stitch into the slip stitch and a half double crochet into the half double crochet. And don't forget, you always start and always end with a slip stitch. You can see the texture here. It has 2 rows now, 2 rows of the wavy texture. That's really all there is to the even moss stitch. It really is that simple of just, you know, alternating slip stitch, half double crochet, slip stitch, half double crochet. I'm going to go ahead and work just one more row with you, just so you can see how it looks after a few rows. I did show you the swatch, but I want you to see how it grows and how that texture definition starts working itself out as you build row on row. Like I said previously, you don't have to worry about a certain stitch count. As long as you have an odd number of stitches, you're fine. So you can make this into scarves, blankets, washcloths, really anything that you want to make. As long as you have an odd stitch count, you're good to go. Okay, so I'm coming up to the end of the row here. Put my last slip stitch in, chain one, and of course you'd turn to keep working, but I just want to show you the beautiful texture that's starting to work itself out now on both sides of the work. It has a little bit of stretch to it, but mostly it's a nice dense structure. But it does stay lightweight, so, you know, working for beanies and scarves and things like that, it won't be too heavy. Now, if you wanted to put a border on the side, it's pretty easy to find the sides here. You're just looking for that chain one that we did to turn. So you just find that space and place a single crochet in the side. Find the next space here. Put a single crochet in the side. Find the next space. So you don't have too wonky of the raw edges. It should be fairly simple to find the edges to keep working, and then of course turn and work along the chains and all the way around. When in doubt, you'd go ahead and just crochet evenly around, but otherwise it should be fairly simple to find the sides of that row. Alright, well that's all there is to it. That is the even moss stitch, made of just slip stitches and half double crochets. Isn't it gorgeous how you can use such simple stitches to create beautiful textures? I hope you've enjoyed learning how to work the even moss stitch with me today. I hope that you are able to move forward with confidence working this stitch. If you're interested in looking at patterns that have this stitch that I've done, I do have a link down below to the photo tutorial, which includes links to those patterns, so you can check those out. Otherwise, I hope that you enjoy doing anything that you can think of with this stitch. Be careful though, because you're going to love this stitch so much that you're going to want to put it in everything. I hope you have a lovely day and happy crocheting.